Assalamu alaikum. So the lesson today is about absolute value. So we are going to give an introduction to absolute value. But first, before talk absolute value, let's talk about distance between two numbers. So distance between two numbers. So in the number line, so if I have a number line here and start for example from 0, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this is -1, -2, -3, -4, and so on. So suppose I want to find out the distance between 2 and 7. So here what I do, I can count. That means we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the distance between the distance, so between 2 and 7 is 5. So I can count. Now, if I ask you what is the distance between 13 and 2679, you're not going to stay keep counting the units between those two numbers, so it makes no sense. So here, look at this. This is 5, this is 2. If I do 7 minus 2, it will give me 5. So here, if I want to find out the distance between those two numbers, I'll just take the highest number, the greatest number, minus the smallest number. Then I will find out the distance between the two numbers. So the distance between is just two numbers. So different two numbers. So let me is the following is greater than B. So then as we notice this DAB will be the greatest, but if B is greater than A, say, so the distance always the greater, and we have a smaller, obviously. So that's means we'll have all between two numbers. So for example, I want to find the distance between, so it's going to be 5 minus 3, which is 2. So the distance between, for example, 3 and -1, so is 3 minus -1, which is 3 plus 1, which is 4. So for example, the distance between -7 and -11 is -7 because it's the greatest, minus -11. So it's going to be -7 plus 11, which is 4. So the distance between 5 and 5, so is 5 minus 5, which is 0, because the same number is not far from itself. It's on the same location. So that's the idea. As you see here, when we pick an even negative number, you see this is greater than 0, this is greater than 0, this is greater than 0, and this one is equal to 0, which means that is greater or equal to 0. That means here I need to have greater or equal to 0. So as you see, the distance is always greater or equal to 0, which means the distance is always a positive number. So this is a remark you need to have. So remark. So the distance is always positive. The distance between two numbers is always positive. Now, suppose I want to do this distance. 5 is equal to 5. What about the distance between 0 and 3? 3 is greater, so it's 3 minus 0, which is 3. What about the distance between minus 7 and 0? So 0 is greater than minus 7. So it's going to be 0 minus minus 7, which is minus minus 7. And this is plus 7. And the distance between 0 and minus 11, so minus 11 is smaller, 0 is bigger. So it's going to be 0 minus minus 11, which is same thing as minus minus 11, which is 11. As you see here, when we have the 0, so if I have the distance between a number and 0, so if the number is a positive number like 5, 3, so we have the distance between 0 and that number is just the number minus 0, which is the number itself. And if that number is less than 0, like minus 7, minus 11, so the distance of 0 and that number, you see? So if I put parentheses here, and this is the number, so it's going to be, and n is negative, it's going to be minus that number, which is 0 minus the number, which is minus that number. As what is my point here is, some students, what they think when they say the distance is always positive, that means the negative sign should not exist. So you have to be careful. Here you see minus n is positive. It's not negative. Why? Because n is negative. So I have minus a negative number. So let me write it down clear. So I have a minus a negative number. Minus negative. It doesn't mean that expression is negative. No. It's negative. If it's negative and I put a minus in front of it, it's become a positive. So you have to be like, the distance between 0 and 3 is just 3. Nothing changed. But when it comes to a negative number, the distance between 11. If we 4, 5, 6, count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 units for the greater number and the smallest number, which is 0 minus minus 7. So it's going to be, you see, minus n, because n is negative. About what is absolute value, in fact. Number from 0. So absolute value of a number n is the distance between n and 0. And the notation of absolute value of n, so we use this notation absolute value n, so we just put two parallel bar and we put the number between them. So this is read absolute value of n. So in other words, that means the absolute value of n in fact is the distance of n from 0. Either do it this way or write it this way, it does not matter, it means the same thing. So as we see just previously, you see the distance, it may be equal n or minus n, depend on the sign of n, if it's n is positive or n is negative. N if n is positive, and is equal to minus n if n is negative, because we are going to use the distance formula value. Give you, so if I ask you what is absolute value of 9, so by definition is 9 itself, but if we use a distance, so absolute value of 9 is the distance of 9 from 0, which is 9 minus 0, which is 9. So the distance of a positive number is the number itself. Now, you see, if I do minus 3, this is my n. You see, this is my n. And n is negative. When n is negative, what we do? We do minus n. So now look, if I substitute n by minus 3, minus minus become what? Positive. You see the idea? So this is the application of the definition. When n is negative, I just put a minus sign in front of that number. Here for that example, minus 3 is negative, so I put that case because the inside number is negative, so to make it positive, we multiply it by minus, because minus a negative number is a positive number. So if I have another example, if I have minus 11, so it's minus 11, so which is 11. This is why most of the students, when they have minus 12, for example, is just like cancel that's a negative sign and they put 12. So you don't have to put minus 12 or minus 3, because the absolute value is always positive. So I put, instead of have negative number, I will change it to a positive. If it's positive, it stay positive. But look, this is for a number. It's a known quantity. You know the quantity. You cannot just say, for example, absolute value of minus x is x. You cannot say that. If they didn't specify what is the sign of x, if x is positive or negative, then you can conclude. If they give you just random x, you don't know the sign of x, you cannot say that. This is wrong. So when they give you an expression or algebraic expression, for example, minus x minus 1, don't say this is x plus 1. You just take absolute value for all the sign here. No, you don't do that. We need to know the sign of the expression first. Either x by itself, or a number times x, or number plus x or minus x. We cannot decide the absolute value of an expression if we don't know the sign of that expression. We don't know the sign, we cannot conclude, and we cannot take off the absolute value. So in that case, this will keep the absolute value as it is. We don't change it. The same thing here. So it's going to be absolute value minus x, absolute value of minus x, because we don't know the sign of x, if it's positive or negative. So please be careful on this. If you know the sign, then apply the property absolute value. If you don't know the sign, just keep it as it is. If you have a known number, that means you know the number, minus 12, minus 100, minus 1000, then you just take off the sign and put the number itself. So it's going to be positive. So I hope this is clear. So let's talk now about the property of absolute value. So given A and B expressions, so absolute value of A times B is absolute value of A times absolute value of B. So let me give you an example for this. I'm going to use number because number is known number. Example. So if I have absolute value of minus 3 times 5 is absolute value of minus 3 times absolute value of 5. So if I keep the operation inside here, minus 3 times 5 is minus 15, and here is absolute value of minus 3 is 3, absolute value of 5 is 5. So here will give me 15, and here will give me 15. As you see, they are equal. So when we have the product of absolute value is the absolute value of the product. The product of the absolute value is the absolute value of the product, or the absolute value of the product is the product of the absolute value. So either direction is the same thing. Absolute value of the product is the product of the absolute value, or you can say the absolute value, or you can say the product of the absolute value is the absolute value of the product. The same thing if I have division. So if I have A divided by B is the absolute value of A divided by the absolute value of B. The absolute value of the quotient is the quotient of the absolute value. The absolute value of the quotient is the quotient of the absolute value. So if I have, for example, absolute value of minus 3 over 37 is absolute value of minus 3 over absolute value of 37. So something 7 with same thing as 3 over 37. So this is why when you have absolute is the quotient of absolute value. So you can the same thing for multiplication, but not for addition. And one mistake that most of the students do of A plus B is less or equal to the absolute value. So if I give you an example of this, you will see it. Example. If I do absolute value of 7 plus minus 12, and I do absolute value of 7 plus absolute value of minus 12. So what is 7 plus minus 12? Is minus 5. So I do absolute value. What is absolute value of 7? Is 7. What is absolute value of 12? Minus 12 is 12. So this is 19, and this one is 5. You see, 19 is greater than 5. So this is greater. So they cannot be equal only if those two are equal to each other. That means those two have the same sign. If both of them are positive or both of them are negative. For example, if I have absolute value of 8 plus 12, so it's the same thing as this is 20 and this is 8 plus 12, 8 plus 12, which is 20. You see? If they are the same sign, okay, but they cannot be equal if they're different sign. This is why in general we just keep it always like this. We don't put the cases when they are equal or they are the same sign or anyway. So if I have absolute value of addition is always less or equal than absolute value of A plus absolute value of P. I hope it's clear. So for subtraction, so absolute value of A minus absolute value of B is less than absolute value of A minus B. So let me show you an example here. So if I choose, for example, absolute value of minus 7 minus 42 and absolute value of minus 7 minus 42. So absolute value of minus 7 is 7 minus 42, and this is going to be minus 49 because the same sign I add. This is minus 35, which is 35, and this is 49. Obviously this one is greater. So you got the point. Alright, so I hope you understand the idea behind the, the absolute value and this introduction about absolute value and the property of absolute value. So thank you for watching the video. If you have any comment that will help me improve my web teaching, please do so. It will help me a lot. Thank you for watching the video again, and Assalamu alaikum.